Donald Trump's supporters, many wearing red hats and stars and stripes-themed clothing, streamed into Orlando's Amway Center on Tuesday to hear the U.S. president kick off his 2020 re-election campaign in the battleground state of Florida. Trump formally launched what may be an uphill battle to persuade voters to give him 4 more years in office, as he bets a strong U.S. economy will outweigh voter concerns about his unorthodox style of presidency. The theme for Trump's 2020 campaign will be Keep America Great. Trump had picked the theme after putting it to a crowd vote. Meanwhile, hundreds of anti-Trump protesters clapped and took photos after a 20-feet blimp of baby Trump in a diaper was inflated near the Orlando, Florida arena where President Donald Trump formally launched his re-election campaign. It wasn't the only helium-filled balloon outside the rally. Over 200 small balloons with Trump in a diaper were put up around the venue. As President Trump threatens mass deportations of millions of undocumented migrants next week, new groups of asylum seekers are returning to Mexico, with some saying that they have been sent south of the border without their family members. Under pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, Mexico agreed on June 7th to expand the program known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, or quote-unquote remain in Mexico, which forces mostly Central American asylum seekers arriving at the U.S. southern border to await the outcome of their U.S. asylum claims in Mexico. Close to 12,000 people have been returned to Mexico since it began in January, according to official reports. Security has been upgraded at the Mexico-Guatemala border. This is part of the efforts to stop migrants from heading to the northern border, with the U.S. locals on both sides who have expressed concerns over the development. Mexico has pledged to deploy 6,000 National Guard members along its border with Guatemala. Many in Guatemala cross into Mexico to buy goods which are sold locally. Local shops in Mexico could face trouble as demands of goods would dry up. Mexico had made a deal with U.S. on June 7th to curb the number of illegal immigrants into U.S. from Mexico. The UN Migration Agency on Tuesday said that at least 380 Latin American migrants have died on their journeys this year. Most of these were Central American who died while trying to cross the US-Mexico border. This number is 50% more than the 241 number recorded till mid of June of 2018. The increase coincides with the US tightening security along its southern borders. This leads the migrants to take more riskier routes. President Trump's administration cut aid to El Salvador, Guatemala and Honduras, blaming their citizens of soughting asylum at US-Mexico border. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met EU High Representative Federica Mogherini in Washington on a day of growing tension in the Persian Gulf between the U.S. and Iran. Earlier, Pompeo spoke during a visit to the U.S. Central Command in Florida and said the U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf is not for war but to deter Iranian aggression. The Iran nuclear deal is at severe risk of collapse a year after the U.S. pulled out, and the European Union is caught in the middle, struggling to keep supply lines open to the Islamic Republic's wilting economy under the threat of U.S. sanctions. Thank you. China and the United States are rekindling trade talks ahead of a meeting next week between Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, with hopes that an escalating trade war between the two countries could be abated. Trump said on Tuesday that teams from the two sides would begin preparations for the leaders to sit down at the G20 summit in Osaka. China, which previously declined to say whether the two leaders would meet, confirmed the get-together. Trump recently had a good telephonic conversation with Xi Jinping in which they have promised to carry the talks forward in the G20 summit next week in Japan. The Russian State Duma, or the lower chamber of parliament, has passed a bill suspending Russia's participation in the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, or the INF treaty. The bill submitted by Russian President Vladimir Putin on May 30th proposes to suspend the treaty signed between the former Soviet Union and the United States in 1987. The bill must now be endorsed by the Federation Council, the upper house of parliament, and then be signed into law by President Putin. The bill stipulates Russia to suspend, not quit, its participation in the INF. The result of the second round of voting for a new leader of the Conservative Party has been announced. Boris Johnson ahead, and four other candidates, Michael Gove, Jeremy Hunt, Sajid Javed and Rory Stewart, have managed to remain in the race to 10 Downing Street. The next ballot is today at 3 p.m. London Standard Time, where the bottom-ranked MP will be knocked out until only two are left. The final two names will then be put to a postal vote beginning on 22nd of June, with the winner expected to be announced about 4 weeks later. The five remaining contenders to be the next British Prime Minister took part in a televised debate on Tuesday evening after Brexit campaigner Boris Johnson took a step closer to becoming Britain's next Prime Minister earlier in the day. He won 40% of the votes in the second round of a contest based on a firm promise to leave the European Union by October 31st. At a BBC debate, Johnson repeated his pledge that he would take Britain out of the EU by October 31st, again saying the only way to do so was to prepare for a so-called no-deal exit and concentrate on winning a new trade deal.
It is very, very important, however, to prepare.
Johnson, Jeremy Hunt, Michael Gove.
Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras was seen urging voters to not turn their backs on his party in the upcoming general election, calling it a quote-unquote fight for their lives during a campaign rally in central Athens. Thousands of supporters turned out to hear him speak, hoping that a turnaround was possible. Remember, the 44-year-old Tsipras stormed to office in 2015 on an anti-austerity platform, only to relent and negotiate a new bailout with lenders months later. The election is now set to be held on July 7th. Hong Kong student leaders led by Joshua Wong have said that Carrie Lam's apology for the controversial extradition bill was not enough. The students spoke after Lam apologized at a news conference for the turmoil. Remember, Carrie Lam in a news conference had refused to say the bill would be quote-unquote withdrawn. She only added that it wouldn't be reintroduced during her time in office if public fears persist. Ethnic violence has resurfaced in the Democratic Republic of Congo. At least 161 people have been killed in the country's northeastern province in the past week. This violence is an apparent resurgence of ethnic clashes between the farming and herding communities. Herders belonging to the Hema community have been the primary targets of these attacks. The herders have long been in conflict with Lindu farmers over grazing rights and political representation. Remember, an estimated 50,000 deaths have been reported due to the open conflict between the two communities from 1997 to 2007. Venezuela's main prosecutor Tariq Saab on Tuesday accused opposition leader Juan Guaido of allegedly misappropriating funds that were destined to help Venezuelans in Colombia. The development comes after more than 1,400 members of Venezuela's armed forces have fled to Colombia this year, heeding Guaido's call to oust socialist President Nicolas Maduro. But a Latin American news outlet has reported that representatives of Guaido, the leaders of Venezuela's opposition-controlled National Assembly, used funds intended to pay for the cost of the troops' hotels for personal purchases. Guaido, on the other hand, has called for an investigation into claims and has revealed that he has handed over information on the case to Colombian authorities for investigation. Facebook has unveiled plans for its new cryptocurrency called Libra as the social media giant plans to move beyond social networking. Set to be launched in the first half of 2020, the global coin will allow the platform's billions of users across the globe to make financial transactions online. Facebook calls Libra a global considered as the social media giants move into e-commerce. A strong and shallow earthquake struck Japan's northwest coast around Niigata Prefecture on Tuesday, triggering a small tsunami, shaking buildings and cutting power to around 9,000 buildings. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the magnitude of 6.4 quake lasted for as long as 20 seconds, and damage included a landslide that struck a road. There have been no reports so far of fatalities or fires. The quake struck at 10:22 p.m. local time at a depth of 12 kilometers. Hungarian police are continuing their investigation into the May 29th collision in Budapest between a Havlini sightseeing boat and a river cruise ship, the Viking Sign. So far, 23 South Koreans in the boat's two-man Hungarian crew have been confirmed dead, with 3 South Koreans still missing since the nighttime collision near the Hungarian Parliament building in Budapest. Only 7 people, all South Koreans, were rescued after the accident. As one of the largest cities of India, Chennai faces grave water crisis as residents are forced to put their own unauthorized pumps and hotel owners have closed businesses until the monsoon arrives. Chennai residents have been standing in long queues in the scorching heat. According to them, they get their share of 2 containers after standing in the queues for hours. Hotels and restaurants too have decided to stop service due to water shortage. In other India stories, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called for an all-party meeting today. In this meeting, which will be attended by party chiefs from across the country, talks on the Bharatiya Janata Party's One Nation, One Election pitch will be held. Remember, the plan was included in the party's 2014 manifesto. However, the opposition parties are likely to not attend this meeting. Hundreds of taxi drivers joined to protest against a planned legislation that would allow ride-sharing services to operate in Romania. The drivers parked hundreds of cars outside Romanian Parliament, calling on the government to not advance the legislation. Taxi drivers have been demonstrating for months now against the unregulated online taxi services. This is despite the government's efforts to control these services. Last May, the government had issued an emergency decree ramping up steep fines for drivers of these ride-hailing services. The decree fines drivers transporting people without a valid taxi license from the first offence. Previously, drivers were fined only after repeated offences. Amnesty International has urged Egyptian authorities to investigate the death of former Egypt President Mohamed Morsi, a political heavyweight in Egyptian politics. Morsi died in a courtroom at the age of 67. The human rights group said that they were calling on the Egyptian authorities to conduct an independent and impartial investigation into his death. They also asked for an investigation into the medical care Morsi was receiving. The body of an Indian magician who drowned while trying to pull off a Harry Houdini-inspired stunt in Kolkata's Hooghly River was recovered on Monday. The body was identified by his brother, Chanchal Lahiri, who performed under his stage name Mandrik, was wrapped up in channels, ropes and 6 locks and then lowered into water. He was supposed to escape and resurface. Lahiri had performed a similar trick in 2013 but was then assaulted by the crowd as they believed he had cheated. An Italian woman aged 116 years, who the authorities say was the oldest person in Europe, died on Tuesday. As per authorities, she was also the second oldest person in the world. Giuseppina Robici died in the southern Italian town of Poggio Imperiale. She was born on March 20th in 1903. In fact, Robici was just 2 months younger than the current oldest living person, Kane Tanaka of Japan. She is now on number 17 in the list of longest living people. On her 112th birthday, Robici was made the honorary mayor of Poggio Imperiale in 2015. A handwritten manuscript by Albert Einstein was on Tuesday donated to the Nobel Prize Museum in Stockholm. The manuscript incorporates a variant of Einstein's 1915 general theory of relativity. It was a response to a paper published by mathematician Eric Trefetz. The manuscript joins other letters from the Nobel laureate and will go on public display this autumn. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was seen shaking when she met visiting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Berlin. Merkel looked as if she was struggling to stand up while she and Zelensky listened to national anthems during military honors upon his arrival. The German Chancellor later said that she was dehydrated and felt better after having 3 glasses of water. The temperature in Berlin is currently 30 degrees Celsius.